And now I will let everyone in from the waiting room.
All right, let's just give it a minute or two for everyone to be in. Andrew, just let me know when I should start.
People should be connected right about now, so you're good to go.
All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the D15 Caucus Town Hall. My name is Saman Kadir Ahmed. I am the D15 and chair of the MCDCC. This, as many of you know, is one of the D15's annual signature event. We often get a full house of attendance where we get an opportunity to hear from our fantastic District 15 delegation about the priorities they will be pursuing in the upcoming General Assembly, which will convene this Wednesday. So our special guests tonight are going to be Senator Brian Feldman, Delegate Lily Chi, Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo. Delegate Linda Foley, unfortunately, could not be here tonight because of a family emergency. So in addition, before we begin, I want to introduce our wonderful D15 Executive Committee. We've got Kathy Dierkowski. Wave if anyone can see your window. Gail Cheek, Larry Arch, Ginger McComber, and some of the MCDCC members that are from District 15, which include Nathan Feldman, Marco Rivera Oven, and Andrew Sondry, who is manning our Zoom today. For any other elected officials, precinct officials, and members of the community, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We've got a really packed event tonight. We have a lot of questions that we have received, so don't be intimidated, guys, beforehand. And we're going to do our best to get through many of them. And if we are not able to get to any of them that are, perhaps you felt very important to get addressed, I do believe, and I welcome the members and our delegates to put their email and contact information in the chat for residents and constituents to reach out directly on those so that they can get better guidance on where you stand on many of those issues. So we'll begin with opening remarks. Each candidate is going to get 5 minutes to introduce themselves. Brian might get 8 because Brian likes 8 minutes, I know. Please discuss your key priorities, your committee assignments, and how you foresee leveraging your relationship with Governor-elect Wes Moore to push for District 15 priorities. So we'll begin with Brian.
Well, first, thanks to the MCDCC for putting this together. And you introduced us as candidates. The candidate phase of the year is over. We're now into governing. Okay, I just want to I don't want anybody to think there's an election that they're about to miss. But I guess I'd start by congratulating Saman for her new gig as the chair of the MCDCC, because following in the footsteps of Linda Foley. So we're keeping in the District 15 family. And also, again, the best part is the Q&A here. So I'll try to be brief, but I do want to give an overview of some things that are about to happen that are, I think, significant. First of all, it's hard to not start by talking about how the political landscape is so different than when we did this very town hall 4 years ago in 2019, January. At the state level, everything's different. Obviously, we have a new governor, new lieutenant governor, but on top of that, a new state treasurer, a new comptroller, a new attorney general. We've got a lot of new chairmanships in the General Assembly we can talk a little bit about. And then even the District 15 delegation looks a little different with Linda Foley taking the spot of delegate and now Judge Kathleen Dumais. So things have changed a lot. But as far as the team, if I might just make a couple of remarks about the team, the D15 team, David Fraser Hidalgo came into his own this term, really leading the charge on environmental issues, electric vehicles, bans on fracking, and a lot of great stuff. He'll talk about the fact that he's going to be onto a new committee where he's going to be chairing one of the subcommittees. I'll let him speak to that. And by the way, he's done a great job on constituent work, from White's Ferry to transportation issues to a lot of other things. Lily had a tremendous first term, and she's really going to hit that second term with a bang. She herself also will be chairing a new subcommittee on business regulation, and I'm in the House Economic Matters Committee. We've collaborated on a lot of bills on economic development, consumer protection. I'll let her talk about that. And then Linda, who can't be here tonight because of a family emergency was mentioned, has followed in the footsteps of Kathleen Dumais, Aruna Miller. And that's why, as a team, we were able to secure more dollars, capital bond dollars for District 15 than in the history of Legislative District 15 in the 2022 session. As for myself, I'm excited to be the new chair of a brand new Senate committee, the EEE committee, which stands for Education, Energy, and the Environment. And so I think this is where the action is going to be over the next several years. I was on a committee previously that dealt with a lot of healthcare policy. And after the Affordable Care Act, I was very involved with how do we reduce our uninsured rate and all the like. That was the big hot issue for some years. Now with the Inflation Reduction Act, we're talking about $370 billion coming to state and local government in the clean energy space. And so I think energy policy, as it ties into the environment, are going to be the hot issues moving forward. And my new committee that is going to absolutely be in the middle of it. We're also going to have jurisdiction in this committee, the aftershocks implementation of the Climate Solutions Act bill that was passed this session, probably the most ambitious climate bill of any state in the United States. We will retain jurisdiction over that. So I'll be working with Dave Lilly and Linda a lot, because their two committees deal with a lot of these same energy environment issues. But the committee is much more than just energy environment. We also will have within our portfolio everything involving education. And that means the aftershocks there of the Kerwin Blueprint for Maryland legislation that is investing $3.8 billion to $4 billion annually a year over the next 10 years. So as that plays out over the next many years, this new committee that I'm going to be chairing will be overseeing all of that. And then finally, I'm not abandoning the work that I've done the last 4 or 5 years. I'm still going to be very much involved with the health insurance issue. We've been able to cut our health insurance uninsured rate in half. And I've got several bills that I'll take back to my old committee relating to healthcare. And then I also am the point guy in the Senate on cannabis. So the legalization that we passed through the ballot referendum in November with the 67% vote. Now we have to put meat on the bones. We have to put the entire regulatory framework in place. And I'll be the point guy in the state Senate on all those issues. It's a complicated issue, a very complicated issue, but I think we're going to get it done. And I look forward to working with that. And then just a few miscellaneous issues. I've got a lot of consumer protection bills dealing with biometrics. I'll be working with Delegate Sarah Love on that. Consumer protection bills dealing with tickets and the purchase of tickets for concerts and disclosures and transparency. But in the end, I guess the last thing I'll say, I do look forward to working with the new governor, Governor Moore, and our District 15 alumnist, Aruna Miller, is the new lieutenant governor. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'm going to yield back to you, and we'll, again, I look forward to, and it looks like we're aligned, by the way, on the backgrounds. I have to say that we're, the team, just final thing, the team is gelling now, and we're really operating on all cylinders going into the 2023 session. We have now a full session with this team in place and a full election cycle behind us. So we're ready to roll in 2023. So with that, I'm going to yield back to you, Madam Chair. And you were muted. Yeah, you're muted.
My son was crying in the background, so I had to mute myself. So I apologize for that. So I'll yield to Delegate Chi and then over to David.
Good evening. Thank you, Saman. You're doing an excellent job. We're so proud of you. And I also want to give a big shout out to the D15 caucus. I do believe our district has the best and most active caucus. We have so many members of different generations and different cultures coming together to move our democracy forward. Thank you for all your hard work. I'm very fortunate to serve with this effective leadership team for my second term. As Senator Feldman just mentioned, he now is the new chair of this Triple E committee, right? Education, Energy, and Environment. And is that environment? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's very much related to an economy. I'm sorry. It's very much related to the committee I serve on, which is Economic Matters, because we also oversee energy issues and economic development issues. And of course, I'm very excited to be the new chair of Business Regulation Subcommittee. That particular committee will continue to work on the family and medical leave legislation, which we passed the last session. And I hope Ginger is on the call. She has been such a strong and passionate advocate for this, along with other District 15 Democrats. Thank you very much. So this is the kind of work we do, especially my subcommittee. And of course, I want to make a mention that the Montgomery County delegation not only is gaining some really significant leadership roles in the House, because of course in the Senate as well, Senator Feldman is an example, but also we are growing in numbers. So besides Delegate Mark Corman as the newly appointed majority leader of the House, which is also a Montgomery County person replacing Delegate Lutke, we have quite a few newly minted leaders across the House, but also we are now 35 members for the Montgomery County delegation, really the largest delegation. So we're well positioned. So I want to get quickly into a few legislative priorities. I like to focus on the 4 E's, which is the environment, the economy, elections, and equity. And interestingly, when I started my legislative work 4 years ago, I focused on making Maryland more competitive and inclusive. Now I have to add one more, which is also more sustainable, because serving on this Economic Matters Committee made me a champion for clean energy. And I could see the intersection between protecting our climate and a community's well-being, as well as growing a brand new economy, which is the green economy. And timing could not be better. So I'm really excited doing a lot of work on that front. Building our work in partnership with Senator Feldman in designating a state green bank. I'm now introducing several pieces of legislation on the clean energy front. I have 3 bills in the coffer right now. One is the Empower Reform Bill. Maryland currently has an Empower program that helps low-income residents with energy costs, but we are not reaping the benefits of the billions of federal dollars because all of these federal incentive programs focus on electrification. But Maryland's incentive programs currently focus on rebate programs for burning fuel, fossil fuel, and other sources of energy. So we really should not be forcing our consumers and households to choose between federal incentives and the state incentives. We need to align because it is the economic bottom line, as well as our community's health and well-being, as well as an economic opportunity. So it's a triple bottom line. And the other is the Maryland Resilient and the Clean Energy Homes Act, which is also in partnership in crossfile with the Senator Feldman, which will require utilities to establish a pilot program to remove financial and other barriers for homeowners who would love to adopt cleaner sources of energy, such as solar, especially if they want to live off the grid, like our good partner Delegate Frederick Hidalgo does, right? I know many of you have been signing on the petition about salt applicators. So my legislation, I will introduce for the second year my legislation to establish a private contractor smart salt training program, so that they will get certified as smart salt applicators to do business in Maryland. We're talking about private parking lots, roadways, and all of that, because there's excess use of salt that hurts the waterways and the environment. Beyond that, I'm working a lot on the economic development front. I just finished my chairmanship for the work group on helping Maryland manufacturers adopt the new technologies to stay competitive. And we just submitted our report with recommendations to Governor-elect Wes Moore and to the legislative leadership. And I am prepared to introduce legislation to establish a significant matching fund to reclaim Maryland's leadership on manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. This is an opportune time with the global supply chain crisis, with President Biden's focus on Make in America. We really can reap great benefits by working with the federal and private sector. And of course, I work on removing barriers for small businesses. I have a couple of pieces of legislation on that, one of which is to remove filing fees to do business in Maryland. And of course, I always work on workforce-related issues, almost every session on career and technical education. And then I have a bill about election in partnership with Senator Kagan. In particular, as an immigrant, I've learned big lessons about why immigrants cannot effectively participate in our primary, close the primary system. And so this bill would delay the deadline for party registration up until early voting time. And then finally, I have a couple of bills related to building on my past work on LGBTQ Commission and Maryland Saves program, which is to help employees of the super micro businesses to start their retirement savings program. So I will stop here and happy to take questions. Thank you very much for hosting this again.
All right, thank you so much, Lily. David, go ahead.
Thank you. And just thank you again to the District 15 caucus. I agree with everything that both Lily and Brian said. It's just super active and it's super great to see everybody coming together and continuing to make sure that that the caucus moves forward. So thank you everybody that helped organize this. So let's see. Most of you probably know that I've been on the Environment and Transportation Committee for the last 9 years. It's been time for a change. I love that subject matter. I love working on environmental and climate change issues. And I've been doing it for 9 years and I love every piece of it. I love it so much that utilities is a big piece of subject matter over in economic matters. So I wanted to go to economic matters to work on more climate change related issues, but work on them when it really comes to when you think about the environment and climate change and the electrification of our grid. Utilities is in that committee, and that's where I wanted to go to work on a lot of that, as well as business related issues and everything else that that Lily talked about. It's a great committee. It has a very wide breadth of subject matter. With that said, I was the chair of the motor vehicle subcommittee, which dealt with a lot of electric vehicle issues, which I've been dealing with for years, promoting electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure. I still have several bills on that moving forward. And my new role as chair of the Property and Casualty Subcommittee will be brand new to me. It's new subject matter. I can't say I know a whole lot about property and casualty insurance, but I'm going to learn. So a few bills that I have coming up, I'll just kind of go through a few of them. Some of them are retreads from previous years. One is I guess I'll just kind of I'll touch on probably one of the kind of the largest bill that I have, which is a very large bill. It's a super fund bill, and it goes after some of the big oil and carbon producers over the years, similar to what we did with the tobacco industry. So the tobacco industry knew that they were causing people to become sick. They knew they were causing cancer, and they continued to do it. And they had all the studies. They knew exactly what they were doing. And after decades and decades and decades, they were held accountable to some degree and forced to put lots of money into a fund, which a tobacco fund, which most of us know something about. Well, this is designed to do the same thing. It's going to hold the really big oil producers, the carbon fossil fuel producers that know and have known since the mid 70s that burning fossil fuels is highly destructive to the planet and produces all kinds of particulate matter and is highly destructive to human beings, especially the most vulnerable population, which are mostly communities of color, kids, and pregnant women. So this goes specifically after them and has them pay into a big super fund, which then goes to mitigate some of those issues. A couple of other bills that I'm working on at the moment are EV bills that deal with EV charging infrastructure, EV bills that deal with EV charging structure for trucks, smog fees for people who drive older vehicles. And then one that's really, I haven't gotten a chance to talk to my team about this, so I'll kind of like let it out tonight and talk a little bit about it. And I'm not sure exactly what committee it will go to. But I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old, and I quite regularly hear from them about and see social media posts from some of their friends and their peers at school that are extraordinarily inappropriate. And I think if their parents knew or saw some of these posts, they would be very, very concerned. So on occasion, I've been able to find those posts and get them to school administration and staff and get those down. For example, posts about fighting, a lot of videos that are posted about fighting. So I have a bill in and I'm not sure where it will go, and I'm not sure how it will go, but it essentially says that all social media providers cannot sign up anybody underneath the age of 18 without parental consent, period. Now, obviously this is a worldwide issue, and this issue specifically, not only is it a worldwide issue, but if you drill down from making it a worldwide issue, it's a national issue. So I'm not under the illusion that in some way this is going to pass in such a way that it's going to be fully implemented exactly the way the bill is drafted. But it's a shot across the bow to the feds to actually do something about this. I think that what's happening in the social media, within the social media framework is really repulsive, and it's all about clicks, and it's all about money, and our kids are paying the price. I can tell you that at Rocky Hill Middle School alone, there were 3 different fight clubs that were labeled different, but they were all fight clubs, and all they were kids beating up other kids. That's all it was. So that's, I hope that goes somewhere, or at least brings some light to that issue. Those are I guess the really big things. I have a half a dozen other bills, which I can talk about. Most of them are environmental. Some of them will be in my old committee. Some of them will be in the new committee. I look forward to getting more well steeped in the subject matter in its totality in economic matters, not only environmental and climate change subject matter, but all subject matter, so that I can put in more bills that actually come to that committee, because I have a lot of bills for the old committee. As far as working with the Moore administration, I've got a really great bill that the Moore administration reached out to me and said, hey, we want to partner on this bill. What are your thoughts on how we can partner on the bill? And I said, well, why doesn't the governor put it in as one of his environmental bills, and I'll just work in the background to help move that bill along. And so excited to have them their staff reaching out to us. Like, it's so amazing. I can't tell you how amazing it is. I know Brian and Lily touched on it, but to actually go into a session proactively working with the governor, as opposed to playing defense or playing hardcore offense, going in as a team, it's really cool. So to have them reach out and say, hey, we want to do something on this, and me saying, I've got this bill, why don't you do it? We'll work together, is really cool. Then the last thing I guess I'll say is that I think Brian mentioned it, and I think as a team, we're firing on all cylinders, and we're doing very, very well supporting each other. I love my team. I love working with everybody. So I think I kind of hit all the talking points, right, Saman? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, no. I think you've got everything. And if we don't, it's okay, because we have so many questions that we're bound to get into something. So we'll be just fine. All right, so the first question, it's about the budget surplus. So currently there's a projected budget surplus. What are your priorities, if any, for spending that surplus? And will you reserve any of the surplus for the future? This question is from Carl Held. So Brian, do you want to begin?
Sure. Well, Carl's son, Andrew, and my son, Matt, are like best friends in high school. So Carl, good to hear from you. Well, before I answer Carl's, I should have also mentioned that the vice chair of my new committee is Senator Cheryl Kagan from District 17, right next door. And she's, among other things, the leader on election law, 911. There was some mention of an election law also comes within the portfolio of the committee. So I think myself and Cheryl will make hopefully a great team. So in any event, with Carl's question, yeah, so we do have a surplus. If you look at the comptroller's office and the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, actually our capital gains numbers and projections are actually a bit in decline. And there is concern about Maryland sort of along with the rest of the United States going into a recession in 2023. And so I think that some of that surplus money, yes, we did that last year. We put some money away in a rainy day fund in the event of an economic downturn. The Moore administration, it's a little awkward here. There's 2 things people have to fully understand. Number one, the state legislature has new budgetary authority relative to the governor. In November of 2020, we took a vote on the ballot that changed the entire Constitution that basically recalibrates the power between the governor and the legislature. Until now, and this all kicks in this week, we have the ability to move and shift monies around. Prior to that, the governor had the most budget authority of any governor in the United States. So now we are an equal player with the governor. And I do know that the new budget secretary is meeting with the budget folks to talk about that right now. I'm not on the budget committee, so I'm not privy to exactly where they're going with that, but I'm quite certain that some portion of that surplus will go into the rainy day fund to protect us against a likely economic downturn, if not a full outright recession. And again, the capital gains tax revenues and some of the other tax collection numbers are actually not meeting the projections when they met last time. So it's not a complete answer, but a partial one, Carl. I will, one final thing, we have a AAA bond rating. We're one of only 11 or 12 states in the whole nation that has a AAA bond rating. And one of the reasons we've been able to do that is we've been pretty smart and conservative about deploying money at a time when it appears we have extra money, when in fact, it's a little illusory. So I think we might be in one of those periods right now. So Madam Chair, I'll yield back to you. And your assistant. And you're on mute. And
I'm muted again. My apologies for that. Ellen, you said hi? All right. Thank you. All right. David, do you want to comment on this as well?
No, I mean, I think that Brian pretty much hit all the pieces. Look, we have money coming in. We do need to be careful with it. The current Governor Hogan had kind of warned on making sure that we're thoughtful about what we do with the surpluses or the surplus. And I think it's important that we do that. At the same time, you know, we were, I think all of us were on Friday night at MCEA's forum. And basically what they said is Montgomery County teachers are being underpaid. So while that's a county council and a county executive issue and a board issue, we're going to do whatever we can to support them to make sure that they get the money to make sure our teachers, that gap is closed. The gap was very startling. It was very surprising. So we need to make sure we do things in that vein as well as a bunch of other pieces, which I'm sure we will. Hi.
All right. Oh. All right. So the next question I have is for Lily. As many of us know that with the new infrastructure bill, there's a tremendous amount of funds that are coming to the state of Maryland. It's probably the most amount after the new deal. So how will small businesses, including single member and small staff businesses, be able to compete effectively for infrastructure project awards in Montgomery County and the state? What help or initiatives can be provided? And this question was asked by Daryl Peppers.
Hello. I saw this question. It's a good one. I think that this is an age-old battle at both state and the county level. And I used to work in the county government, and we battled with the departments to force them to unbundle some of the contracts. So that's at the local level in terms of small businesses contracting with the state and the county governments. But in terms of getting federal dollars, the bills just passed by the federal government, as far as I understand. They have not trickled down yet. So it's still, the details still need to be worked out. But if small businesses here have any specific ideas of how they can most effectively participate in that pie, we are all ears. You know, we are here to help in advocating for our small business in any way we can. And I believe Governor-elect Moore has some ambitious goals in terms of elevating small businesses. I mean, he worked in the private sector. He understands deeply Montgomery County, and not Montgomery County, Maryland in general needs to be much more competitive regionally and globally. So I very much am in favor of his agenda in growing our economy and supporting small businesses. And I urge our small business community to really step up in your advocacy about some specific ideas on that. But at the local level, I know both the county and the state government has some work to do, which you also know how to advocate in terms of how we manage the contracting and procurement process.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lily. So we're going to take a brief pause because we have a special surprise guest tonight. I want to recognize Jamie Raskin, Congressman Raskin, that is here tonight. And Andrew, would you mind spotlighting Congressman Raskin so that he can give a few comments? He had said that he'd definitely try to at least stop in and, you know.
Forgive me, you guys, will you give me like 5 minutes? I'm just getting off another call, but I wanted to log in.
Oh, so, absolutely. Whenever you're ready, sir.
I'll come back in like 5 minutes. Thank you much.
So we'll go on to the next question. Let's see, where are we going to go? All right, so let's go on environment. And this question is for Brian because he touched upon it. what are your plans to go beyond the Climate Solutions Act that you mentioned in your opening remarks? And this question is from Sylvia Diff.
Hey, Sylvia. And I know Sylvia is passionate about offshore wind, and there's going to be some big offshore wind legislation in the committee this year. But on the broader issue, I mean, in all candor, the Climate Solutions Act of 2022 is probably the most ambitious, as I said earlier, bill of its kind in the United States of America in terms of goals, greenhouse gas emission goals by 2031, and then even broader goals by 2045. And so I think right now I anticipate it having happen this session is we're going to have folks coming in to try to pare some components of the Climate Solutions Act back. And parts of it's a very broad bill. We're talking about a 100-page bill with ambitious goals for electrifying our state auto fleet, to electrifying our state buildings. But these are some years out into the future. So, I mean, I think right now what we need to do is pass legislation to allow those goals to actually be achieved and implemented, rather than, beginning already talking about new bold things in the 2023 session. At least we got to sort of get moving here. There was actually reports that as a result of that due to give us some recommendations on how do we implement the 2022 Climate Solutions Act. And I'd like to see the benefit of those recommendations that are going to come back to the General Assembly in 2023 before we start talking about bolder efforts in 24, 25, and later. I think, again, we're going to see bills trying to pare that bill back. So I think that's where we are, at least in the 2023 session.
All right, fantastic. So David, next question for you. It's a question I remember asking last year as well, and it gets asked to David regularly. It's the status on White's Ferry and reopen. It's I know there was something regarding the reopening that happened recently. So if you could just give us an update on that, because it's been asked several times by quite a few members.
Sure. So as you all know, it was about 2 years ago that White's Ferry shut down. It was as a result of a private dispute between a party that existed in Maryland and a party that existed in Virginia. Since that time, the party in Maryland sold the ownership of the ferry to another party in Virginia, which is great in some ways and challenging in others. The reason it's challenging is because, the reason it's great is because that particular party has the financial ability to kind of do a lot. Unfortunately, what's ended up happening is that those two parties have gotten into kind of a very challenged relationship, and we in the state of Maryland have very little levers to kind of force them to the table. We have employed everything we can in the state of Maryland. We've reached out to the governor, trying to get the governor's staff involved, trying to get the governor involved. The governor has not. Our governor has basically said he doesn't care. He sent his director of state highway, SHA, which had a quick question for them. That went absolutely nowhere, and they pursued it not at all. At the road show, you can see where we as a team were asking questions about it, and the SHA secretary of SHA basically said, well, I asked and they said no. So that was the end of the conversation, which was extraordinarily frustrating for me, because that's not the end of the conversation. That's just the beginning. In other words, what does Virginia want that Maryland has to get this open? They didn't care. So with all of that said, there's been, we have a group that we're all on, and about every 6 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on if there's new information coming out, we have a call. And I think it was the 28th or 29th. There was a rally up at White's Ferry. It was a great rally. It was not a rally that was, it was a rally to continue to show the importance of White's Ferry. It was really great. It was a great opportunity for people to get out and talk about how important it is. With that said, what ended up happening is that what ended up happening from that rally, the results that were yielded were that the county has been working on a plan that we've been supporting, because the state has not been able to, and the county actually hasn't been able to do much either. Loudoun County just doesn't care. But we are kind of bypassing all of them and trying to work directly with the landowner on the other side, and kind of take out everybody in the middle. So right now, we're getting close to having a direct deal with the owner of the ferry on the other side. A lot of folks have come close to having a direct deal with her and haven't actually gotten it across the finish line. But in this case, I'm pretty optimistic. The county executive, Mark Elrich, has been he's been pushing really hard just in the last couple of weeks. So I think we're getting a lot closer to a deal. There's a kind of a part A and a part B, and it's just really, really hard when you have no levers in another state and people in the other state that do have levers don't care. The Loudoun County Board of Commissioners just has put no energy into this. So we're trying to bypass all of them, and the county executive has a really good plan at this moment, as well as Montgomery County DOT, and we're just kind of keeping our fingers crossed. We're getting a lot closer than we have been.
And I wanted to bring attention to a point made by Councilmember Andrew Friedson to a constituent, Kathy, that eminent domain isn't really an option because it would have to be exercised on the Virginia end, because the land in question is in Virginia and not Maryland. And on
That's
that
correct.
note, sorry for the background again, Congressman Raskin, would you mind sharing a few remarks? And thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me now? Thanks so much for having me, everybody. And Madam Chair, thank you for inviting me to participate for a moment. It's a delight and a pleasure to be with all of my wonderful new District 15 constituents and my former colleagues from the General Assembly. And I remember so well that feeling of excitement and anticipation about going back to Annapolis. So I want to say hi to Senator Feldman, my old seatmate buddy from the floor of the Maryland Senate, and to Linda Foley, and to Lily Shee, and to David Fraser Hidalgo. You guys have an amazing team there. And I'm also psyched to learn this week that our friend Mark Corman is going to be the majority leader of the House, which puts Montgomery County in a very strong position, I think, to make sure that our interests are always going to be represented in Annapolis. Unlike on Capitol Hill, you guys are going to have concurrent Democratic majorities and a Democratic governor. And we almost have the same thing, but of course, the Republicans have achieved a razor-thin, narrow majority in the U.S. House. And they just showed you over the last week exactly what's going to be like for the next 2 years, with the most extremist faction in the Freedom Caucus essentially driving the train of the Republican conference. This is what we've been up against. This is why my friend Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger have been basically expelled from the Republican conference. It's why they've turned on Mitt Romney. Anybody who was willing to stand up to Donald Trump and to the authoritarian forces he's unleashed against us was just getting completely expelled from the party. And so we're expecting a series of major confrontations over the debt ceiling. They've said that they're willing to shut the government down. We're going to have lots of confrontations over, marriage equality, over the gun safety legislation we just passed, and so on. So we are hopeful that we're going to keep the train of progress moving from the 117th Congress. I mean, we had the Inflation Reduction Act with dramatic reductions in prescription drug care costs, and we're going to make sure that the Biden administration has the resources it needs to implement all of that. We got the Infrastructure Act, which has been very important to Maryland, with hundreds of millions of dollars coming our way for all of the road improvements we need, and the bridges and the highways and the ports and the airports and rural broadband, and you've got it. So we're going to keep making progress, even though we've got divided government now, at least for the time being. And we've seen exactly what that means over the last week. I got home at 2:30 in the morning on Friday. I slept most of the day yesterday. I was so exhausted after a week of the ridiculous posturing and speeches and their inability to form a majority. We were proud that we had 212 Democrats every single time for our new minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries, who will be a great leader. And we're going to just keep making the progress we can. But this is the thing that makes me so glad about, what the delegates and the senator are going to be able to do from D15 and from Montgomery County in the upcoming session of the General Assembly. And I hope to be able to greet you guys there. So I just wanted to say hello to everybody, and I'm happy to take a question or two if you need me to, or I can leave you to your devices.
If anyone has a question for Congressman Raskin, please feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, Congressman Raskin is free to.
Hey, Madam Chair, could I just say one thing to my former seatmate of 3 years in the Senate? Unfortunately, it was an honor to sit with him. The problem was I found myself having to speak most of the time after he made one of those classic Raskin speeches on the floor of the Senate. So it was a challenge. And anyway, great to see you, buddy.
And it's great to see you, Brian. I'm wishing you a great session, and the delegates. I know you guys are going to bring home the bacon and do a great job. So thank you for everything you do.
Kathy, any comments?
So this is Kathy. On behalf of the District 15 caucus, we wish you a complete and full recovery. And we're thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Kathy, you are loved. Thank you. And thank you for all the messages and everything, you guys. I did get this diagnosis of lymphoma. The good news is that it's the most common kind, because I'm a man of the people, as you know, and it's easily treated. It's a curable form of lymphoma. So I'm doing 6 treatments at Georgetown. I've already done one of them, and the doctors are extremely optimistic, and I'm really optimistic. And I, hope not to miss any votes. I haven't missed any votes so far, and there were a lot of votes this week, as you know. And I hope to, rise to the occasion of meeting all of the propaganda and disinformation we're expecting in the oversight committee as I take on the role of being the ranking Democrat on oversight, which is a great, awesome responsibility and honor, given that it was Elijah Cummings who had that job for so long, who first recruited me to that committee. So I'm glad that it's back in the hands of Maryland. So thank you, Kathy.
All right. Thank you so much, Congressman Raskin, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time and wish you the best. And as we get back to our Q&A, the next question is on healthcare from Joseph White, who will be working to advance women's autonomy in health decisions, i.e. right to abortion this year. Why did the Maryland Senate drop the ball on it this year? Or if at all?
Do you want me to? Well, so my committee did have jurisdiction over the issue, and I do believe, and I was actually the floor leader in the Senate on the abortion access bill, which I think was landmark legislation, probably the most significant bill since 1992, when we had that issue of codifying Roe v. Wade on the ballot 30 years earlier. So I wouldn't say I would characterize the 2022 session as dropping the ball. Plus, we, because of that law, millions of dollars we think are going to be directed towards training additional providers in that space. In terms of dropping the ball, just for some context, because the issue of putting it in the Constitution, it's true the Senate did not do that. This was pre-Dobbs, so we were dealing with politically, potential gubernatorial veto, and the Senate, unlike the House, which did pass Speaker Jones's, I think, constitutional amendment, the dynamic was different. Folks that were on the fence about voting even for abortion access were willing to do that, but didn't want to necessarily take a second vote. This is in my own committee. You need to get 6 out of 11 votes, and there were folks there on the fence. And so, since we already have Roe v. Wade in statute, the idea of forcing people to take a second vote that didn't really change much on the ground, we made a calculation. We'll go with abortion access bill. This was pre-Dobbs. We didn't know what the Supreme Court was going to actually do. It's easy after the fact to look back. But I think this year, post-Dobbs, we will go ahead, I'm quite certain, and likely put that in the Constitution. But we do have some other work to do. I myself will be working with Ariana Kelly on a bill that would require that all of our public universities in Maryland provide access to contraception and referrals to medical abortion access to local referrals. I mean, it's actually a pretty significant bill. So Delegate Kelly, who's been from Montgomery County, who's been the point person on the House side, we'll have the House bill, and then protecting folks who come from other states into Maryland. What do we do for women who come from West Virginia or places like that? And so there's still a lot of work to do, but I wouldn't characterize anything we did in 2022 as dropping the ball. I think it was a huge step forward, but there's still work to be done, Joe. That's how I look at it.
All right. Do any of the other delegates want to comment? Do any of the delegates, actually not the other, do any of the delegates want to comment on any of the abortion rights legislation or anything regarding healthcare for women?
The only thing that I would add is that Delegate Kelly is now the vice chair of HGO, and that puts her, I mean, she's always led very hardcore on this issue for years and years and years. And now that she's the vice chair of HGO, I think it bodes even more well on this particular issue. I think we'll do even better than we have in the past. That's all.
Okay.
Also put in the budget millions of dollars to train nurse practitioners and midwives to actually get on with the implementation of the legislation. So really there's teeth there. It's not just rhetoric.
All right, fantastic. All right, next question is from Ann Connor. What will the process of implementing recent guns in public places legislation look like?
I'm not sure what legislation she's referring to exactly. We did pass ghost gun legislation this year. I don't recall what she's specifically referring to. And I'd be honest with you, I'm not on the Judiciary Committee but I'm not I think the main bill we passed this 2022 session dealt with ghost guns. It was actually Senator Susan Lee's bill. But beyond that, I don't recall anything significant on guns.
All right. I think Andrew also mentioned that it's probably a county bill, so that Ann is referring to. So then we can just pivot to the other side. Mary Linda, what are your plans to try and reduce gun violence within the state, if any?
Well, I'll just reiterate. I mean, we actually in 2013, when Governor O'Malley was here, we passed a gun safety package of laws. I think at the time was considered the most robust in the United States. And actually, District 15 delegate, now Judge Dumais, was the floor leader on all those bills. And then later we came back with red flag laws in 2017. This year we passed ghost gun legislation. I think we've been pretty much out front of the country. So I'd be interested in specifically where you think, now that we don't have to worry about gubernatorial vetoes like we have the last 8 years with the Republican governor on these issues. I'm sure we can do more, but I'd have to know at least specificely what the question is referring to.
Hey Brian, didn't you work with the Lieutenant Governor-elect Miller several years ago on one of the bills as well?
Yeah, that had to do with antique guns. I mean, we've done what we can do facing potential gubernatorial vetoes, including this year with Senator Lee's bill on banning, ghost guns and things of that nature, which was, I think, a pretty significant bill.
Absolutely. So the next question is from Will Roberts. Now that marijuana legalization has passed, and what are the steps the legislature needs to take along with the governor to, one, ensure equity and opportunities for Black and Brown-led businesses in the market, and two, see that the state is using part of that revenue to invest in communities hit hard by the war on drugs? So there's an economic aspect to it, but then there's also the equity side.
Hey, Senator Feldman and I both are assigned to the work group. I'm on the House side, he's on the Senate side. We both are assigned to the work group to work on the details to figure out how we can actually implement this legalization move. And luckily, it's been a decade into legalization for some other states. So there are many lessons to be learned. But we have to take a very nuanced approach in protecting public safety and public health first, and then consider how we can make sure the people who have been disadvantaged the most can participate first in the legalization move, so that they can not only move to the front door for possession and use, but also participate in economic opportunities. and also how we can be very sensible in business regulations so that we don't make it more pricey to go back to the back door, right? Because if you consider this a lucrative tax revenue windfall, then you may end up having unintended consequences. So there are a lot of details to be figured out, but I have really enjoyed listening to the national experts of different teams coming to talk to our state legislators. And I am one of the two representatives, along with my chairman, C.T. Wilson from Economic Matters Committee, who work on business regulation part of that aspect, along with the criminal justice and public health, et cetera. So I'm really looking forward to that work.
Yeah, so as Lily mentioned, we're on a work group together. I had the legalization bills in the Senate this year, actually the last 2 years that didn't involve a referendum. They were just straight up legalization bills. But on the social equity, like that is real significant. In fact, in anticipation of that, we did fence off in the 2022 budget monies a cannabis assistance fund, which will be directed specifically to future minority-owned businesses. A lot of the existing medical licensees, if they want to get a adult use license, they're going to have to pay a big fee. That money will be redirected to impacted communities who were disproportionately impacted by enforcement policies of the past. We have a new Black Caucus chair. I should mention that Janelle Wilkins from Montgomery County is the brand newly elected chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, who will be extremely important in all this. And I spent Janelle and I went out to Western Maryland to tour a cannabis growth facility on Friday, and we talked about this for a few hours in the car back and forth. So this is a huge issue, but there's no way we're going to pass a bill that doesn't have social equity funds, a licensing regime that takes into account that there needs to be space for diversity in the ownership's realm. So I just think as a political matter, the votes wouldn't be there unless that's contained in the final package. So Lily and I are, in the middle of the mix, and I think we're going to get it done. The one final thing, the last 2 years when I had a bill in the Senate, there was bills in the House, there was no coordination between the House and Senate. Truthfully, no coordination at all. This time we actually have a joint House Senate work group that hasn't existed. And we have a governor who himself, I think, could be relevant and important here on this. We have the first African-American governor in the history of our state. So when you talk about social equity issues, I think he could play an important role to get this over the finish line. And I think he's prepared to do that. So when you put it all together, I'm optimistic we'll get a bill done and it'll have all the things, Will, that you mentioned.
All right, and I have one question from Agnes Leshner on prison reform. I know that it's probably not your committee assignment, so you can talk about it generally if there's a bill in the House or the Senate. What legislation is being proposed in Maryland for aiding the transition of returning citizens back to the life in the community? Is anything being proposed to limit or eliminate solitary confinement in Maryland prisons?
I'm not on the Judiciary Committee. I will make this point that the chair and the vice chair of our Judicial Proceedings Committee are both Montgomery County Senators, Will Smith from District 20 and Jeff Waldstreicher from District 18. And so I think I don't want to, jump over Jeff and Will on this one, but that would be within their purview. So I personally am not aware of, any particular issues or legislatively that have been introduced. But. All
right. So let's go to a safer topic, education. Is universal pre-K likely to be funded in Maryland? This is from Mary Lou Fox. No, Agnes Leshner, sorry.
Who's that for? Anybody in particular?
Who wants to take that? David, you haven't spoken in a while.
So what I would say is, again, there's not going to be any big surprise here. That subject matter doesn't come to the committee that I was on, Environment and Transportation, and I think that goes to Ways and Means, doesn't it, Lily and Brian? So I think that, Brian, you'll have some education in your committee. I know there's a much larger push for it now with our new governor. So I know, Saman, you had mentioned earlier about talking about that, and I think that we have more opportunity now for issues like this than we ever have. So I think that letting the governor kind of get actually sworn in, which is important, and then letting him and Lieutenant Governor-elect really kind of get their feet wet and figure out exactly where they are and what they're doing, I think will yield very positive results. I'm not sure exactly when, but if it can be done, which I think it can, it'll be done under this administration, maybe not year one, but maybe in future years.
Well, education will come to my committee, and I, as I mentioned earlier, the blueprint does provide a huge amount of money over the next 10 years. Some of that I suspect will end up supporting what the questioner would like to see, universal pre-K. What I would add also, we have this 7-member oversight board that was created to actually vet things with Britt Kerwin, and the chair of that is none other than our former county executive, Ike Leggett. And I plan to, sit down with that group. They're going to come back with recommendations periodically, and I'm sure this particular issue will be front and center for that. That 7-member board chaired by Ike, that I think is going to be in the middle of some of these kinds of discussions and conversations.
I believe, let me just add to that. I believe the blueprint for Maryland's future already has funding in the past couple of years for starting with 4-year-olds, especially for families of lower income levels. So I think every year we are expanding that program. And I agree, Governor Moore, elect Moore, is very ambitious. I think one of his top goals is to eliminate childhood poverty through early childhood education. So we're very optimistic about that.
All right. So
can I just loop back one thing, because Andrew Greason made a point I should have made on guns, because we talked about expanding. The reality is we're a little bit in defense mode, because we have some laws now that are subject to some scrutiny by the courts based on the Supreme Court case involved, and Andrew sort of makes reference to it. And so there's some lawsuits already, I think, about to be launched or already launched, attacking to attempt to strike down some of our laws involving well, you can read about it, but I think they're going to have some bills and some lawsuits and some things like that in retrospect. I should just throw that in the mix. It's one thing to talk about more ambitious gun control laws, but we may right now, because of the Supreme Court, be in a little bit of a defense mode on some laws that have been on the books for quite some time.
All right. So the next question is also education post-COVID. It's from Don Earp. What steps can the state take to continue to fund schools across the state and in Montgomery County as the grants from the federal government to support COVID-era programs come to a close when those programs have been shown to have value to the community generally? Brian, you're muted. Can you hear Brian? Does anyone else want to begin with commenting on it before we go back?
Anyway, it looks like I'm on. Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yeah, we can.
We all got upgraded computers, and a bunch of us got computers that the mute button doesn't work properly. So we may all have to turn in our new state computers. Anyway, now I'll just reiterate what I've said about Kerwin. It's a $4 billion annual investment. And that includes, things like what the question was directed to. So I think there is money there potentially. And so I think I hate to be going back to the Kerwin funding, but that's part of the mix here.
All right. Okay. So let's pivot to the environment. And one of the questions we got, it was from Derek Longrake. What are your ideas or plans to support agriculture in the ag reserve, both small scale vegetable and fruit, as well as diversification of large scale farms?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that was a great question. I'm so glad I'm not an elected delegate.
I will take a stab at part of it. Look, the ag reserve is 93,000 acres acres that has been set aside and preserved for agriculture. As we move forward, there are all kinds of issues that are in some ways aligned and in some ways colliding. I will tell you that as far as alignment is concerned, I think seeing the pandemic and what the pandemic brought, which is a lot of food insecurity and supply chain issues, has put us in a position, I think, where elected officials, as well as everybody, farmers and school systems and everybody is looking at the supply chain, and they're going, we really need to grow a lot more locally. I know I came out of, going into the pandemic and seeing the fact that in some cases we weren't going to be able to get poultry, in some places we might not be able to get meat, and going, my God, this is, if the percentages had been a little bit higher, and the supply chain had been a little bit more compromised, we could have a serious problem feeding people. Now, we already have that problem with food insecurity, and then the Up County Food Hub was established to help address that. But I do think that there is a lot of opportunity, and I'm going to use a little bit of a pun because I just can't resist it. There is a lot of low-hanging fruit that we need to take advantage of. We need to grow a lot more in the ag reserve. We just do, and I think that there's some opportunity. We've been working on some things, but there's a lot more to do. As far as collision of issues, there's always kind of a collision of the ag reserve being reserved for agriculture. And I know there's been some push and some pushback on putting solar in the ag reserve and what that looks like. I'm not going to get into that in any great detail, other than to say that we have this RPS where we want to develop our own renewables, and throughout the state, and in Montgomery County that becomes more problematic because we have the ag reserve and nobody else really has that. So there's that piece as well. But I will say that that being aside, which is a very complicated issue, I do think that there's the ability and the opportunity for us to promote more locally here in the state, and specifically in the ag reserve. I know that I've been working on a couple of boards, CSA, for CSAs, and for community farm share, to make sure that we figure out how to grow more locally, more sustainably. It's more important than ever. And if you didn't see what happened in the pandemic, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Love to add to that, Sabah.
Oh, please.
In the past couple of years, partly because of my work on Economic Matters Committee, I had the opportunity to weigh in on a few pieces of legislation that impact our farmers, especially one of which, as I was the business filing fee bill. My previous legislation led to a comparative analysis with other states about what small businesses pay to just do business in the state of Maryland. And we found ourselves to be one of the least competitive states, especially in this region. So my bill actually would eliminate all of the Maryland family farmers from having to pay any filing fees annually just to do business in Maryland. And also last year, when we were evaluating the merit of establishing an insurance fund for family and medical leave, I introduced an amendment to carve out family farms, because oftentimes they hire their family members and it's a super small kind of organization. So those sensitivity and approach to family farms are very important in advancing our agricultural economy. And also, I think Maryland needs to build on our cybersecurity buy local program so that we actually incentivize our businesses and communities to buy local, to expand on that.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would add is to exactly what Delegate Chi said, and that is there are a lot of local farms in District 15, and you really should, and a lot of them are open from, for 6 or 8 months. And whenever you get the opportunity, please, please, please shop at them. I go and I buy fruits and vegetables on a regular basis from farm stands, particularly in the Ag Reserve and in District 15.
The right to repair. I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add that, I mean, just to be clear, this 1/3 of our entire county that's preserved in the Ag Reserve, it's the largest percentage of preserved land like it anywhere in the United States of America. I mean, when David says, or Lily say that there's, it's unique in the nation, it really is. And so I would also say, I see Caroline Taylor piped in the chat. I think the D15 team, we've worked hard to establish great relationships, like with Caroline Taylor from Countryside Alliance to, all the Poolsville commissioners. And I think that's part of it. that relationship with those folks who live closest to the ag reserve, tell us what they need, and we try to help. And we've done that. We've worked pretty closely to try to build an agritourism community up near the ag reserve, or as part of the ag reserve. And so I think we're going to continue to be doing a lot of work like that in that community.
All right, so this question is from Valerie Dickerson. It's the nexus between how it's Seattle County and between healthcare and transportation. It's time to think about the transportation issues for our citizens in the up county areas like Poolesville, Bealsville, Barnesville, Dickerson, Boyd, etc. This is an issue we have been trying to remedy for years. Our healthcare surveys have our residents dead last in the county. It's not because they don't have insurance mostly, but because they can't get to the doctors anymore.
So Valerie's one of those town commissioners, former town commissioners I was alluding to earlier. She's, personally a friend of all of ours, and we have a great relationship with her. On the healthcare issue, COVID, for all the horrible things about it, did jumpstart the issue of telehealth. And we've actually made some real strides. In fact, we have a report due, the Maryland Health Commission. It's an entity, has actually is doing a major report on expanding telehealth, largely because access to certain communities, rural communities, and they're due to, I have a note here, due December 2023. So that's not until the end of this year, a very thorough report on expanding access to telehealth, if that ties into broadband access and the rest. So that would solve a lot of elderly folks and others during COVID. Were able to utilize that and not have to drive 20, 30 minutes, a half hour or longer. So that's one component of it. I also would say I was up at Rocky Gap speaking at the Merrill Rural Health Association. There's a whole package of bills how to attract more doctors to rural America, rural Maryland. When we did the Poolesville Day Parade, I think Dave and Lily, we met a doctor in Poolesville. He was the only primary care doctor. There's only one primary care doctor in a town of, I think 7,000. The average is 1 per 700, and in Poolesville it's 1 per 7,000. So everything from loan forgiveness programs for doctors leaving med school, all kinds of things are on the table. But that organization's been pushing an agenda along those lines. I think that's really important. But telehealth right now, I think, is a potential partial solution to the problem.
So the last question that I have for you all, it's from Diganta Das, I believe, and it's regarding the planning board policing. So will you support Senator Kramer's MG/PC 104-23 to create a task force to study structure and processes of the Montgomery County Planning Board?
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I know there's opposition from the county council. This would also have to go through the Prince George's apparatus delegation. So there's a lot of obstacles before it quite candidly gets over to the Montgomery County Senate delegation. I did watch the hearings. There were arguments on both sides. And so honestly, I'm reserving judgment a little bit. I do need to find out a little bit more about what's in the bill, what's in the bill, as opposed to what everybody's saying. And I know it's essentially a task force, but I know there's been a lot of pushback on that bill and what it means, even though it's only a task force that would come back with recommendations.
Right. Again, my apologies for my unruly toddler. Life is still in COVID for me. All right, so we are at 8:10. So despite all that, we're right on the dot for a time check. This town hall does end at 8:30. We wanted to leave a little bit of time for members of the community to really be able to engage in. And if anyone wants to weigh in or make any remarks, because we do have the delegation here, and I think it's a really great opportunity for you all to listen as well. So if you can raise your hand, and Andrew Sondry, who is going to be manning that, will just call your name. Does that work, Andrew?
Yeah, I see Caroline Taylor first.
Thanks, Andrew. Sorry, I was not doing this by the book, so I had a few questions in the chat. Folks have already addressed White's Ferry issue. I did ask a question about PFAS and PFAS class chemicals, the forever chemicals that have been being detected in the environment, most recently in Poolesville's drinking water. Their groundwater aquifer seems to have been affected by them, at least some of their wells. They've been very proactive in shutting down the affected wells. But the question for folks here is, knowing that these are coming from a variety of sources, what can the delegation do moving forward to limit residents in D15 and elsewhere in the state exposure to these very dangerous classification of chemicals? That's number one, and I'll hold number two. Thank you.
I can open with that if you want.
That's fine. Go ahead, David.
Okay, so I know, Caroline, we had a bill in last year. I don't remember whose bill it was. It may have been Delegate Stein's bill. I don't recall the bill sponsor, and I think that there was a lot of inroads made. But I think given what's happened in Poolesville, which I just found out about as well and was pretty shocked, although we probably shouldn't be that shocked, I think we'll see more of a push to do some kind of banning of PFAS as much as possible. It often takes years to get something like this done, but we don't really have that time in this particular case. So while I'm not going to be on that committee anymore, I know how that committee runs, and there will be a bill in, I'm sure, this year to follow up from last year's. I hope it gets some legs, and I will push on it as hard as I can from where I am. And I know that eventually actually would go to Senator Feldman's new committee, I think.
Yeah, honestly, I think this would come to my committee. I look forward to talking to you more about it, the subject. I would say it would be helpful. One of the things we're a little bit of disadvantage right now, we don't have cabinet secretaries in place. I'm really, really hoping that Governor-elect Moore over the next week will name a Maryland Department of the Environment secretary, a health secretary. You know, you need some folks at the state level in the executive branch to coordinate some response to something like this. It can't just be a legislative response that has to go through the whole legislative process. I think that needs, and I'm hopeful that the administration will make those kinds of selections, or at least the nominations over the next week. We need those people in place for something just like this.
Absolutely. Thanks to both of you. If I may, my second question very quickly is, looking for support champions for the Reclaim Renewable Energy Act, and hoping that folks can look carefully at that.
Are you talking about Vaughn Stewart, Karen Lewis Young bill? Yeah. So I'll take a crack at it. I mean, I think, and I'm sure we've talked about this over the years. I mean, the issues are, I think, one way of looking at it, it's not as simple as it would appear on the top at the, first blush. Best examples: County Executive Elrich came into office in 2019, end of 18, saying that by 2022 he was going to get rid of the incinerator plant up in Dickerson. Well, here we are in 2022. It hasn't happened, and the reason it hasn't happened is some of these other some complicating factors, which is, number one, we have Montgomery County has a contract now that apparently was signed at the end of 18 that goes to 2026. If Montgomery County were to try to get out of that contract, there would be millions lost by Montgomery. But there's a political component to this as well. That particular bill that Vaughn has brought in, this is Dave and Lily's committee, has not gotten out of the House Economic Matters Committee. And so I'm sitting in the Senate. I'm just being candid with you. Like, there's a political dynamic to this that hasn't moved out of the House. Maybe Lily or Dave might have some insight about that. Karen Lewis Young is on my new committee, and she will be bringing it in committee. But here's one thing, Caroline. I'm serving on a committee of 11. 8 of the members have no background on anything involving energy, renewable portfolio. This is a brand new issue for 8 of the 11 folks on my brand new committee. And so we'll have a full-blown bill hearing with Karen Lewis Young as the sponsor on the committee. And I think we'll have to see sort of, and the Moore administration, I'll just bring that up again, Had we passed this in the last few years, it would have been vetoed. I don't know if we could have overridden. Now we potentially don't have to deal with that issue. So I'll be very interested to see what Lieutenant Governor Miller and Governor Moore with his new set of cabinet secretaries, they can weigh in on this too, and that could be hugely impactful. So, but we also need to know what we'll do with the 600,000 tons of trash if that incineration plant Dickerson were to be closed. And right now, I don't know that County Executive Elrich has figured out a plan yet. So those are some of the outstanding issues. The politics in Baltimore are different too. The Wheelbrader plant and the Baltimore City delegation politically have resisted bills like Vaughn Stewart's. So I'm just throwing out some of the various potential obstacles, but they are there.
I
just want to.
I'm sorry, Lily, did you want to go?
I serve on Economic Matters Committee, and I can say last session, notwithstanding the fact that we had a brand new chair, right, C.T. Wilson, but also I think the consideration was the Climate Solutions Now Act was the most important bill that we should focus on. So anything related to that, they were sort of in the holding mode, to see what the Climate Solutions Now bill would include. There were so many components to it. In fact, our committee was the secondary committee, and I cannot speak for the chair, and I cannot explain why he chose not to move the bill out of the committee. But I know the overall mindset of the committee was that we should focus on the Climate Solutions Now bill, in partnership with ENT, and that was a big lift. In addition to the fact that we had to do another big lift, which was the Federal Family and Medical Leave, Family and Medical Leaves bill. So,
all right, Andrew, who's next?
Diana Conway.
Hi, thank you guys. Thanks for holding this town hall. You always make sure to be very accessible, and we appreciate it. So thank you. I wanted to raise the bill that I brought up at today's environmental legislative summit. Delegate Lehman's bill that got out of the House last session by almost 2 to 1, requiring a chain of custody for artificial turf fields so that we can actually show, yeah, there's no solution to all this waste. I mean, you want to talk about a whole lot of waste. This is 400 tons of mixed toxic plastic waste that there is no recycling for anywhere in the US. And it never got taken up in the Senate. I mean, Cheryl Kagan introduced it in her committee, and it was very late in the session. And Senator Pinsky wanted to move on his big bill, which is, understandable. But now that my friend Brian Feldman, who used to be my delegate back in the early days, you're chairing the committee. I know you've got some familiarity with the issue. Would love to talk to you more about it. We're not trying to ban anything. We're not trying to put any fees. This is simply a bill that says anybody with a synthetic turf field that's more than 15,000 square feet, and that might actually change to 20, I think. Anytime you move it, just tell us where it is and who has it next. Where was it and where is it going next? There's no fee, there's no permit, there's no inspection. And the industry is fighting us on even that as onerous. So we're hoping this will just be a clean sail through. And of course, it brings to bear all the toxicity issues that have been raised, including PFAS. There are several jurisdictions on sole source aquifers in Massachusetts, just like Poolsville is, that have turned down synthetic turf fields because they did not want that PFAS leaching off of 100,000 square feet into their soil and water. And it's more than the surface area of the field. There are 800 million plastic blades. So it's all that surface area, also leaching PFAS, heavy metals, carcinogens, and endocrine disruptors into your water. So we're hoping for your support on this chain of custody bill. Thanks.
Well, Senator Kagan is, going to be a huge part of the new committee. So not just this because she's vice chair, but she obviously brings with her a lot of institutional knowledge of that issue and others. So I look forward to talking to her and to you about this bill if she's bringing it back. I don't know if somebody else is carrying it or not, but
she's not carrying it, so we're still sorting out the cross file. But
gotcha.
It's good to know you're chairing the committee, Brian.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Quick question. Hey, Diana, I know you've been working on this for so long. Did you ever work with the Lieutenant Governor-elect on this particular issue? Was she involved? I'm sure you had maybe some meetings back in the back in the day on this with her directly?
That's a good point. Thank you, David. Yes, we were. In fact, in 2018, she and then Senator Roger Manna were cross files on her bill that originated with her. We're talking about Arinda Miller, of course.
Mm-hmm.
She filed the bill and promoted it to ban the use of program open space funds on these plastic surfaces because the theory of open space is preservation, much like the Ag Reserve. And at the time, the waters were very unfriendly. A lot of members basically poo-pooed it and honestly were kind of disrespectful to her. So she is also very aware of the issue, and we're hoping for a friendly reception from the executive branch as well. Thanks.
Well, I think that those days of being disrespectful for her, toward her, are clearly over. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Andrew, next. Who's next?
Jane Stern.
Jane, you're muted. Still muted, friend.
Terrific. I finally got it unmuted. My question is about the new construction on Old Georgetown Road, which they have taken away one lane of traffic for cars and dedicated it to bicycles. I often use that road and I never see a bicycle riding along that road, but I do see lots of cars. In fact, the morning of the Montgomery County legislative breakfast, I was driving home along Old Georgetown Road, and I saw 2 rows of cars that had to wait through 2 light cycles to get past the light at Old Georgetown Road and Tuckerman Lane. But in all that time, while those cars were putting out the pollution that they put out when their engines are running, I saw not a single bicycle to compensate for that additional pollution. I have been told by a member of the county council that the county council had nothing to do with that decision to do that to that road, but that it was the state board of the transportation board. And also, I have also been told that legislators from District 16 had some part in promoting the idea of doing that. The people in next door Regency have posted serious concerns about that decision and feel it's not quite fair to provide 1/3 of the roadway to users who, frankly, are no more than 1 or 2% of the users on any given day. So I was wondering what you know about this issue and what the likelihood is of having this decision reversed by the people who depend upon that road. There's now 1 large high school that gets access from that road. That's Walter Johnson High School. There will soon be a new high school on the former Tilden Middle School's site. So there'll be 2 high schools where the teachers who have plenty on their plate and a lot of demands on their time will have to be trying to access those schools during rush hour. And this will just add to the time burdens of their commutes. So any help you can give us on this issue, I know we will be happy to have.
So Jane, my initial recommendation would be to speak with the District 16 delegation, the delegates in the center, because that's clearly in their district and in their jurisdiction. Also, the Motor Vehicle Transportation Subcommittee, which is now chaired by the newly minted delegate Sarah Love, who actually happens to be one of the District 16 delegates. So I would reach out to the District 16 delegation and particularly to Delegate Love, because she'll know the best way to handle that.
Thank you.
All right. So our last question for the evening will be Jerry Garson. In the interest of time, just to time check, it's 8:26. So we're going to try to wrap up quickly after Jerry's question.
Should there be any monetary penalties on Pepco for not repairing street lights that are out on wooden poles for more than 1 month after being reported? We have a street light on 7 Locks Road, which has been out since it was reported on March 12th, 2022, and many others in the area that have been out over a month.
Jerry, could you tell me who you reported this to?
Pepco has a thing on an online website that anyone can report any street light out, and it gives a date that the first person reported the street light out. And somehow they seem to stop repairing street lights that are out. I know they save some money on the cost of electricity, but they are a safety thing, especially for people walking on the streets.
Happy to look into that because our committee deal with Pepco all the time. We'll be happy to look into what the current policy is, what their promise is, and what would be a good measure to hold them accountable.
Hey Jerry,
Right.
if you could send that to Lily or me or Brian, but actually send us, if you have a screen capture or you have some confirmation of when you or someone else first reported that, so it gives us a little bit more of a stronger case going in. Thank you.
Well, I know the one on my block I previously reported. I was the one who reported, and it's been out for about 2 months already. Thank you.
Just send us that documentation. Thank you, Jerry.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. I see that our time has come to a close. I want to thank all of our District 15 delegation for taking the time to join us this evening, talking through all the questions, helping us understand the issues and priorities. We wish you all of the best in the upcoming session. You know, District 15 did its best to make sure you had a Democratic governor to work with. I think we carried the day on that one. And the lieutenant governor is also formerly District 15. It still lives in District 15. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time for our state and our district and our community. So again, thank you so much. I do want to recognize Kathy Dierkowski briefly for a minute or two, just so that she can make any announcements, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, I just want to say the District 15 caucus supports our legislation is a coalition of precinct officials throughout our 33 precincts. If anybody wants to join us, if you want to go on to the website at d15democrats.org. And I also wanted to thank all those people who helped us at the hub in Germantown. We did 360 boxes of food to be distributed throughout the county. So, and thank you to Delegate Fraser.
And also, I want to give a thank you. Congressman Raskin has left, but also recognize Andrew Friedson, if he's still on the chat. Thank you so much for being a part of this forum and for being so active on the chat to making sure that we had the information regarding the gun laws. Do you want to say anything, Andrew? You are technically part of District 15.
He had to pop off. He sent me a note that
All
he
right.
had to pop off. So
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you at the next town hall.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.